last time we talked about how after the counter coup of July 29 that the North was planning to secede, and they called that Operation Araba. The idea was to break Nigeria apart and to have a Republic of the North, and they even commandeered airplanes, two BOAC and Swiss Air VC-10 airliners. They briefly commandeered on 29 July. Each made one trip to Kano, conveying families of northern troops. So they were moving their people to the north, and the folks who were marching, they said they should go to Ilori. They're going to break Nigeria apart. But they were prevailed upon by some permanent secretaries and other public figures, and also by the British High Commissioner and the United States Ambassador. Some of the permanent secretaries were Alhaji Musa Dagash, Abdulaziz Attar, Yusuf Gobir, and Philip Asioju, Aida, and so on and so forth. The Federal Chief Justice, Sa'adatu Demola, was also involved, and the Inspector General of Police, Alhaji Kamsalem, and Sule Katagum, the Chairman, Federal Public Service Commission, was also involved in the negotiations. And of course, we have Francis Cumming Bruce, who was the British High Commissioner, and Herbert Matthews, the United States Ambassador. And so when they were done, they had to come to a compromise, and I'll just read from here. On August 1, Gowon accordingly assumed power as head of state and supreme commander. In an apparently hastily prepared broadcast to an expectant nation, Gowon briefly reviewed the country's recent and prevailing troubles and promised to do his utmost to restore normalcy. He earnestly hoped the country's problems would be resolved amicably, envisaged a return to democracy as soon as practicable, and made a number of other pledges. Iran's unitary system of government, Gowon insisted, had been thoroughly discredited, hence he repudiated it. This particular aspect of the speech, as is now well known, immediately proved controversial, exploited no doubt for purely selfish political reasons. Anyhow, Gowon moved deftly to appoint Colonel Robert A. Adebayo as Western Region Governor, and on 2nd August released Chief Awolowo from prison, an action which was warmly welcomed in Lagos and in the West. Then on 4th August, Dr. Okpara, the erstwhile Eastern Premier, was also freed, as were Chief Ani Kayode, the one-time Western Deputy Premier, and 14 other former AG, NCNC, and NNDP prominent politicians. One of the things that we said on this matter is that folks have lied, saying that Ojukwu released Awo. The truth of the matter is that Ojukwu did not even say he released Awo when Awo was released. I'm going to quickly just, get us back to the book by Ken Saro-Wiwa. The book is called On a Darkling Plain. I'm just going to read that portion, then we'll get back to this. We'll come back to this book. All right. It says here, this is, again, On a Darkling Plain by Ken Saro-Wiwa. It was about this time that Lieutenant Colonel Gowon set Chief Awolowo and Chief Enaoro free. Gowon himself received Chief Awolowo at the airport and assured him that the nation would still need his services. The Yoruba people went berserk with joy. I say the Yoruba people advisedly. Opponents of Chief Awolowo there were, no doubt, but the leadership of that camp had also been in prison since the January coup. General Gowon had also set them free, and with Chief Akintola out of the way, there was hope that the Yoruba would reunite under Awolowo and that peace would therefore return to Western Nigeria at long last. The act of freeing Awolowo pleased the Yorubas immensely, although Ojukwu sent Awolowo a telegram of congratulations on his release from detention, affirming that the decision to release him was one of the last acts of the Ironsi regime. The Yorubas did not appear willing to believe him, and we still don't. We don't care. More so as the Igbos had appeared to be courting the North, as witnessed the installation by Ojukwu of the Emir of Kano as Chancellor of the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Credit for the release of Awolowo went solidly to Gowon. You must have heard some lunatics, curse people out and shout that, no, we must make Ojukwu did not release Awo. The funny thing is this, even when you show them the video of Gowon welcoming, receiving the Papa Awo, this clown still keeps talking nonsense, right? So that's I just read it from two books. So we have, like I always say, Bible says in the mouth of two witnesses, the truth shall be established. That's what we like to compare sometimes. Back to this one now. beckoned to serve by Shehu Shagari. The same day, Gowon announced that representatives of regional governors would meet shortly in Lagos to advise the regime on immediate measures necessary to restore confidence and stability in the country. On the eve of that meeting, August 8, Gowon broadcast his first policy statement in which he abolished the unification decree and restored the federal system. Again, he did not introduce unitary system. He did not abolish the regions. That's what Iransi did. So he says here, he abolished the unification decree and restored the federal system, although this was not formally decreed until 1st September. He restated his faith in Nigerian unity and made a number of promises, notably the reorganization of the armed forces to insulate them from politics, the eradication of corruption, and full consultation with the people on the form of association they desire for themselves. The return to federalism would serve as a basis for the latter, and the consultation itself would be via regional leaders of thought. But amidst this upbeat atmosphere, there remained a major difficulty. Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu continued to reject Lieutenant Colonel Gowon's leadership. Ojukwu had asserted in a broadcast within hours of Gowon's takeover speech that the leadership belonged to Brigadier Ogundikpe, being the most senior officer after Iransi. He also opined that the July killings had once again cast serious doubts as to whether the people of Nigeria can ever sincerely live together, and that he would ask Eastern chiefs and interest groups to advise him on what to do. Ojukwu's indignation was quite understandable, if plainly self-righteous. But the simple truth behind Ojukwu's correct argument about military seniority was that he himself saw Gowon as a junior and was therefore unwilling to accept his command. Yet, the seniority between Ojukwu and Gowon was really a question of one day's difference between their respective promotions to lieutenant colonel. That such a trivial issue should have obstructed a compromise in the national interest is one of the most poignant aspects of the Nigerian drama, one which I believe would find favor in a democracy. That's a lot of Turenchi. Is saying that Ojukwu said he couldn't, accept the leadership of Gowon, and that the right person to take over should have been Brigadier Ogundikpe. And I remember saying it last time, in case you were not here. If you read the book, The Nigerian Civil War by John de St. John, a very funny drama, played out there. Ojukwu insisted that Gowon should take power, but Ojukwu was just kidding himself. Why? When a coup takes place, military hierarchy is suspended. Nobody cares who is the guy. It's the person or persons who organize the coup that determine who will be their head. And I think what they should have done is they should have retired this man. That's the mistake I think Gowon made, and I don't even blame him because it wasn't like he was prepared for it. They should have retired Ojukwu. You cannot talk about the fact that, there's hierarchy, the next person is Ogundikpe. Meanwhile, I read something from that book the other day. Ojukwu ran away from government house in Enugu. He ran to the police headquarters. He then ran away from that place 67 miles. He ran to Onitsha, hiding. It was while in hiding that he took a phone and called Brigadier Ogundikpe in Lagos, telling him that the East was solidly behind him, even though he was hiding under one duvet. So when you say things like you should go to Ogundikpe, number one, it was a coup, not army promotion. And this man, Shehu Shagari, is explaining that, you see, the difference between Ojukwu and Gowon was just that one day between their promotion. In other words, maybe one was promoted on a Monday, Ojukwu was promoted on Monday to lieutenant colonel, and then Gowon was promoted on a Tuesday. All of that is even secondary. The point is, it was a coup. And the way coups happen, nobody cares about hierarchy. That's why if you notice, in most cases, they retire the senior guys. Because I don't want to have problems like this one that Ojukwu was giving him. But that's not the real issue. What's the real issue? Let's look at the book Ojukwu's Rebellion and World Opinion. It's a book published in 1968, written by Neville Graham Douglas. He was the Attorney General of the Eastern Region, appointed by Ojukwu himself. And this is what he had to say. Now, what he's talking about here is in August. I want to read something that happened in June, after the May crisis in the North. On the return of my military governor from Lagos, on or about the 7th of June, I had the opportunity of a full-length discussion of the situation with him. And the one thing that emerged from such discussion was his determination to take the East out of the Federation sooner or later. When was this? June. There was no counter coup at this time. What has happened here was that there was killings in the north, unfortunate, but there was no counter coup, all those things had not happened at this point, right? Even the real killings of July had not happened. This was just civilians being murdered, which is terrible, by the way. But as at 7th of June, Ojukwu had already made it clear to Graham Douglas that was going to pull out of the country. I was going to take the East out of the Federation sooner or later. Quote, "We are finished with the Federation. It is all a question of time." End of quote. He assured me. I wondered. I knew that he had hoped to become head of state. Listen, though. He wrote this book. Ojukwu was still alive. This was in 1968. I didn't say 1938. So Ojukwu was alive, and it's not 2024. Ojukwu was alive. He says here, I wondered. I knew that he had hoped to become head of state of the Federation of Nigeria sometime, replacing Major General Aguiyi Rossi, the contempt for whom he did not much disguise. Founding such hope as he did on the belief that by virtue of his formal education, he would be more acceptable than the other possibles for the position in due course. In other words, the primary reason he did not listen to Yakubu Gowon or wouldn't submit to his leadership was because he wanted to be the Oga. This was not about Gowon, it was about his ambition. And it says here, that hope was dashed by the northern incident of 29th May and after an unmistakable expression of resentment of Igbo domination. He wasted no time in planning for himself for the future, and the one answer was to be head of state of an independent Eastern Nigeria, by whatever name it might be called. I realized this at once in the course of our discussion, but there was nothing I could do other than advise that such a move would be successful only if predicated upon the common consent of all the peoples comprised in the region, and that accordingly his first task would be to work for the solidarity of the peoples. I was still in that position when on July 29 the country was awakened to the news of another coup d'etat. The former one was Igbo inspired and executed. This time it was a northern affair. When was this written? 1968. They knew there was an Igbo coup and they knew there was a northern counter coup. And the Igbos liked the fact that there was an Igbo coup until the counter coup. That's when they began to say, we didn't do it. It's just that some of us were there. I'll read it again. I was still in that position when on 29 July, the country was awakened to the news of another coup d'etat. The former one was Igbo inspired and executed. This time it was a northern affair. On learning of it, we of the Eastern administration were at once paralyzed by fear of our own safety and of the probable outcome of it all. But at first, we adopted an attitude of wait and see, which soon gave way to a strong hope of immediate independence and sovereignty for Eastern Nigeria, brought about by news reaching us on Saturday, July 30, that negotiations were going on in Lagos between representatives of the northern officers of the Nigerian army behind the coup and those still loyal to the federal military government, and that the firm standpoint of the northerners was the disintegration of the country into 4 or so sovereign and independent nations on the basis of the existing regions. Nothing could be more pleasing to the Eastern Executive Council, and if the manner in which the name Republic of Biafra was immediately suggested and readily accepted for this prospective entity is something to go by, one might say that we now had before us, I'll tell that again, one might say that what we now had before us was the hope of the immediate fulfillment of a long-standing desire. What does it mean? He's saying that after the July 29 coup, they were all afraid. They didn't know what to do. But they got news that the northern officers were actually trying to break the country apart, and they were so happy that somebody even suggested the name Republic of Biafra. In other words, and Igbos, if you are here, please listen, the name Biafra did not come in 67. It came because of the possibility that the north was going to split the country in 66. That's in July. And when they were prevailed upon by the people I mentioned earlier, Alhaji Kamsalem, Adedokunbo Ademola, British High Commissioner, American ambassador, and so on and so forth, they then changed their mind. So that's what I'm trying to say here. So they were happy that, after all, they're going to break this country. Until, of course, they didn't break it. It will be recalled that the first time the Nigerian political atmosphere was dominated by the dark cloud of secession was in 1963. The very first time Nigeria was going to have that secession issue was in 1963. Guess what? That was 9 years after Papa suggested that secession clause be included in the Nigerian constitution. 9 years. Zik was against it, but Zik region wanted to secede in 63, just 9 years after the incident in London. It will be recalled that the first time the Nigerian political atmosphere was dominated by the dark cloud of secession was in 1963, following the national census enumeration of that year, when the Eastern Nigerian government took the strong position that the Northern-dominated federal government had manipulated the figures so as to give the North an undue numerical advantage over the rest of the country, and particularly to the prejudice of the East. In consequence of that position, the Premier of Eastern Nigeria and his ministers threatened to take the East out of the Federation. And in the end, wise statesmanship on all sides prevailed to prevent the situation from deteriorating into a national calamity. But even after that episode, the East did not appear to have settled down to a complete reconciliation with the idea of the perpetual maintenance of the integrity of the Federation and of that of the absence in the Nigerian Constitution of a provision enabling any constituent region to secede from the whole, if and when it might wish to do so. But now, arising out of an evil thing, a northern-inspired and executed military coup, was the likelihood of the attainment at no distant date of the goal of independence and sovereignty. That is, a complete political break with the rest of the Federation, which the East, through its politicians and leaders, had set for itself since crude oil was first exported from Port Harcourt in eastern Nigeria in 1958. It was a matter in respect of which they appeared not to have seen any virtue in silence and secrecy. What does all that Turenchi mean? You see, the eastern region was cool and calm until oil was discovered in commercial quantity in Oloibiri in 1956. 58 was the first time oil was exported, and that was when the East began to say, we want to change the allocation formula of Nigeria, where they get to keep the bulk of it. Before then, they wanted to share the money based on, there was no oil at the time, they wanted to share money based on need. The Western region says it should be based on derivation. The East said based on need. Eventually, by the time they struck oil, they were like, it has to be based on derivation as well. As a matter of fact, they were planning to take all the money. But here's the issue. All the plans in 64, the plans they had in 1963, was predicated upon the oil in Niger Delta. That is the reason you can't hear Biafra without South-South today. It's not because of love, it's because of resources. All the idea we're going to break out of Nigeria, to be honest, there was a census crisis and the North was said to have inflated figures. Sheshagai also mentioned it here, and we talked about it at length the other time. So it's true that happened, and the Eastern region was like, we're going to secede. And they even came up with a study group to work on the feasibility of the East as a separate entity in 1963. You find that in the book by Uswanlele Uyilawa, where he talked about, what they needed to do to be able to stand alone, apart from Nigeria. But here's the issue. They were not planning that thing based on their own ethnic nationality. They were planning it based on the resources of other peoples, even though the resources you're talking about cannot be found in their own space. If you take time to read Anthony Alauro's 1968 speech, you'll see how interesting the whole thing was. So want to have a nation is literally because there is this hope, or this almost like an assurance that they're going to have access to the resources that belong to others. Someone says there was no way the oil producing region would have joined the Biafra. Where they didn't want them to join, they took them in because they were in the eastern region. That's the reason for state creation in May 27, 1967. That's the reason Gowon broke that place. Because it began, I mean, I still saw something today. Somebody said Alaibo was the old Eastern region. It's like, how? That it wasn't even about them deciding. It was about the fact that they said, oh, you are in the Eastern region, therefore you are part of us. And that's why, and by the way, while they were saying that, again, like I said, they didn't care about the people in those places. If you want to know how those people were treated, read this book I'm reading right now. We're not going to get into that today, by the way. But if you read, by the way, this book is available free of charge. Free of charge. It's on our Telegram channel, Radio Me Global. Read that document, Ojukwu's Rebellion and World Opinion. You will see what happened to the people that own the resources in their own land, what Biafra did to them, what Igbos actually did to them. Read Elechi Amadi's Sunset in Biafra. You will see what happened to them in their own space. The kind of pain that was inflicted upon them by Igbo soldiers in Biafra. That's why I said it was not about the people, it was about the resources. And that's why when the states were now created, when the East was broken into three, and people talk about, oh, he broke the East into three. Let's make something very clear. I know it's not today's topic, but it's important to mention it. The East was not the only region that was broken. Remember that in 1963, the West had been broken into two. West, Midwest. In 67, the West was further broken into two again. Lagos and Western states. So you have three states or three regions or three states from one state or three regions from one region. So it was West, then you had Midwest, they eventually now became Bendel, and then you had Lagos out of the West, leaving Western states. What happened in the East is similar to what happened in the West. The East was broken into East Central, Southeast, and Rivers. Rivers is present-day Rivers and Bayelsa. Southeast is present-day Akwa Ibom and Cross River. East Central is present-day 5 southeastern states. And the North was broken into 6. So this whole cry about, oh, they did this to us, it wasn't just to the East. But it was necessary that that thing be done. Why? Because the Igbos would go into areas in Akwa Ibom and they were changing the roads, the names of on their roads. They were having New Owerri Road in Akwa Ibom. I said in Akwa Ibom, by the way, I kind of have a soft spot for them, and I say that like they are good people, great nation. Sometimes I try to imagine what they went through. And that's why when you have conversations about the war, whatever, people say things like, oh, but Philip Effiong was from Akwa Ibom and was second in command. The whole idea is to have tokenism, right? Is to use tokenism to push the narrative. It's not about how the people were treated, but the fact that one of you was one of the leaders. Right? So you had that going on. People suffered, but they wanted to use what they had in order to have their own nation. So that's what this man was referring to. Let's go back to the book by Sheo Shagari. We'll come back to this later.